So yes, I am Deacon Victoria, and I serve here at St. John's. And I have been working with a group of people since 2020, summer of 2020, to address racial justice issues. And we did the Sacred Ground curriculum for 2 years running. We have a graduate classes of almost 30 people, and we've learned a lot. I will say that going through Sacred Ground and learning about the injustice of the criminal justice system, the injustice of the 14th Amendment, and other forms of injustice were really appalling and traumatic for me as we went through the Sacred Ground. But restorative justice was so intriguing, and so this leads me to Eddie and I have known each other for probably, we first met about 20 years ago, and he gave a presentation in our class about a program at the Texas Department of Criminal Justice that he led, and it was an eye-opener. And as we went through our restorative justice section of Sacred Ground, I always thought of him. So he and I reconnected back in February at a pre-council meeting. It's like, we're so excited to see each other. And I asked him then, would he do a presentation for us? And he said, sure. So here we are. But Eddie, let's give him some credit. He was director for the Orange County, Texas Judicial District Courts, 128th, 163rd, 260th, County Court at Law, number 1 and 2. He's worked in the field of criminal justice for 42 years. And he has worked, part of that time, if not all, has been regarding restorative justice, where he was working with offenders and the victims of crime. So we're very pleased to have Eddie join us. Eddie, I'm going to spotlight you. So you're going to fill the screen so that, or I'll put you on speaker view, because whatever I see is whatever gets recorded. So I'll pass it on to you now, Eddie.
Well, thank you. And good evening, everybody. So thank you for inviting me, and I'm so happy to be here. When Sandra when Victoria and then Sandra asked me about doing this here, and then as I've been trying to prepare for it, I was like, there's just so much. And really, this is about sharing from your heart what I've done all these years. And I think that would be my preparation of what I'm about to talk about in the next hour or so. So, this issue of restorative justice, it's funny. It just, as you all were sharing your name and what your interest, I began to think about my name, Eddie Mendoza. So Eddie. So why Eddie? And if we talked about restorative justice, my gosh, my name is spelled Edwardo. Edward O is what I used to say. I hated the name. Years later, I remember, I'm already grown, married, and I got into an argument with my mother saying, why did you give me that name? It's spelled with an Eduardo. She says, I know it's spelled with an Eduardo. But you were born in a small town east of Lubbock that was, racist. To put it bluntly. And so when you were born, they asked me what name, and I gave him EDUARDO. And they said, no, that's too Mexican. So he's an American now. So we're going to put the name EDWARDO. I didn't know this story. All I knew was that I hated that name all these years. And because I couldn't pronounce my own name, I changed it to Eddie. So Eddie was easier to pronounce. And then my mother said, but I don't know, what's the big deal? I mean, you're a grown man. You works in the courtrooms. Just go change your name. As a matter of fact, I don't think you even need to change your name, first name, but legally, you can just change your name to the EDUARDO. I'm telling you what happened. And so after she said that, I said, you know what? I'll keep the name EDWARDO. It's a nice story to talk about. And so Eddie is much easier. So that's why everybody knows me as Eddie. And I still don't know how to pronounce EDWARDO. I say Edward O or Eduardo or whatever, but it's not Eduardo the way it should be. So let's talk about restorative justice and what I do. 42 years now. I retired back in 2015 with the Texas Department of Criminal Justice after 30-some years. And then I went into doing more consulting work in the schools. Mary talked about a school teacher, restorative justice. I was working with preschoolers, and we're talking about 3 and 4-year-olds. And you would think, okay, now why would a 3 or 4-year-old be involved with this here? Well, you'll be surprised at that age, because I was working with the high-risk kids whose parents were either in prison or doing drugs or had been taken away from them. And so the kids were in foster parents or, in some other kind of setting. And so I was working with these kids. Now, one of the programs that Deacon Victoria talked about was the Victim Offender Mediation Dialogue. And I'll say a little bit about that later. But the other one, which is called Bridges to Life or Puentes a la Vida, is a program where we go inside the prison. And in that program, we talk about 14 topics, or there's 14 sessions we give. Once every week, we go and give a session. And one of the things that I remember is offenders will share their story, because one of the topics is they talk about their family and their background, their past, their present. And so I kept hearing that when they were a kid, when they were in first grade or, 3 or 4 or 5 years old, 6 years old, how they struggle and how they saw that violence in the family. And so they talk about how they wish they would have had somebody that would have understood them, what was going on with them at that age. Mm-hmm. And not to, as they would say, I'm not trying to justify what I did in my crime. I own to what I did and I'm responsible for it. But I did have a hard life, and I wish I had somebody that could help me then. And so as a retiree, I decided to go into the school system and do some work with them. And it was amazing. I never thought about even going into the school system, especially with preschoolers. I always think of Arnold. Oh, what's the name? Last name? Arnold, right? Whatever, the strong guy.
Schwarzenegger.
Yeah, and when he is working with kids and they say, "You have a tumor." I don't have a tumor. I don't have a tumor. And so I always remember when I was working with the kids, like Arnold was working with those kids. But anyway, those kids would tell me stories of what was going on at the house, that I was going in my head, how can a 4-year-old, a 3-year-old share with me those stories? How can they tell me what they saw that night? With the police coming in, taking their parents to jail or whatever. And so it was, I remember those offenders telling me those stories. And so that kept me from even committing myself more to working with those kids. Some of my friends, retirees, would say, how can you do that? How can you go into the schools and work with kids at that age after you're retired? I said, oh, you just would not believe how much I get from working with them. I mean, my heart was full of just joy and blessings that God would give me. And I would pray, God, give me the strength, give me the strength to be able to do this. And sure enough, I was able to do that. And so in restorative justice, and I'll talk a little bit about the school, and then I'll go into the models that I want to talk about. But in the school, as Mary was talking about, it's so important to apply restorative justice practices inside the schools, especially at elementary. I used to say that, and I used to work with high schoolers, middle schools, and but what interests me again with elementary was that they're the ones who really need to be worked on because they're going into the next level, which is middle school and then high school. So why get them at high school level or middle school and then wait for the next wave of them coming in so I can do the same? No, it has to be changed before then. And so I go into the schools and I work with the kids. I work with the school. And it's about changing the whole campus. It's not, oh, yes, I want you to work with this teacher or with this classroom. No, we need to work with the whole school. The school has to be first. If you think of the pyramid, for example, in the pyramid, you have the base. And so let's imagine that base being the school, the campus. And then you got the middle part of the pyramid, which, would be what I would call doing some more intense restorative justice practice. And then you get to the very peak of the pyramid. And that's now where you get into the more serious one-to-one student who has gotten into a fight. And so what goes on the base when I say work with the school? Well, when you work with the school, we're talking about changing all those mindsets of how we approach or how we see students. And, you know, and I, on the education, they have the most hardest job, I think, teachers, because they're given the job to teach them, you know, academically teach them, but they're not as trained to do some of this other work. And so you train them. And so I would begin to train them on what it meant to do a restorative justice practice, which was, for example, how to talk to a kid, you know, because teachers will always say, I don't have time with this kid because I got 20, 30 more. So how can I work with this kid when I got all these other kids I have to? And they're right. You know, there's truth to that. But the kid that is left behind, let's say, or dealt with another way, which would be go to the office and then let the principal or vice principal or whoever take care of you, because I don't have time for you in the classroom. And so it was to how do you teach or train teachers that it's important for them to look at what's going on with the kid's life so that they can understand what's going on in the classroom. And so, and yes, it takes time in the beginning, but once you do that, then it gets better because you have dealt with the root of the problem. I remember one kid, for example, that was in the I came in around 8 o'clock to the office. I reported to the office, and they already had a first grader, a kindergarten kid there, all ready to see the principal or vice principal because he hit somebody. He hit another kid. Again, the teachers say, send him to the office, go to the office. And so the kid was like this, just holding onto those fingers, their hands so tight. And I said, what happened? Look at me, so, you know, didn't want to say anything. I said, did you get in trouble? What happened? And then the support staff, tell him what happened. You know what happened. You know, you've been in my office now so many times, on and on. Tell him. And I'm going, oh, it's okay. Don't worry. It's okay. He'll tell me. So I said, but before we do anything, let's kind of relax those fingers. And so I took my hand and I took his finger and I opened his hand. Then I opened his other hand. I said, now let's relax him. Come on, let's just relax them. Play with it. Now, if I can just get a smile. I said, let's get a smile. I know there's a smile behind those lips of yours. Come on, come on, let me see your teeth. And then he started smiling. I said, I knew there was a smile. All righty. All right. You feel better now? All right, what happened? He said, I didn't want to come to school. I said, well, you know what? A lot of kindergartners don't like to come to school either. And but it's important you be here. Don't you want to be with your friends? Don't you want to learn? Yes. So what happened with you? Why did you hit the kid? What was going on? He said, well, I don't know. All I know is that I didn't want to come to school. And when I got out of the car, my mother pulled me out of the car and whipped me and then told me to get, using foul language into the schoolroom, into the schoolhouse. And so he says, when I went into the classroom and this kid was playing with a toy that I wanted to play with, and so I went and got it and he put it away, and then I punched him and he came at me and I punched him again and took the toy away. I said, yeah, so what would have been better? I mean, is he your friend? Do you like him? Oh, yeah, I do. Yeah, we're good friends. We play. So you didn't mean to hit him? No, I didn't want to hurt him. And so again, is if the teacher would have just been able to talk to him, find out what happened that morning. Why was he so angry? A lot of these kids come in angry, coming in from, either their parents being in jail or being taken away from the house and all that. So a lot of stuff is going on with them. And so their restorative justice practice is just to be able to talk to them, to be able to sit down with them and say, what, I want you to be a part of this classroom. We all love you. We all care for you. So let's see what we can do. And again, I understand the teachers when they say they got so much stuff, and they do. But a lot of this work that I'm talking about, if you do it up front, it does become better. Because I got called into a classroom about a few weeks later in the same school. It was fourth graders. They had 3 teachers already, and those 3 teachers were like, they left. They said, well, it's not worth it, nothing will pay enough for me to be in this classroom. And so they asked me to come in and work with them with a new teacher now. It was her first day. And I started working with the kids in 2 weeks. In 2 weeks, the principal came back and said, this is not the classroom that was here 2 weeks ago. What did you do? And all I did was just treat them where they are and began to teach them how to communicate, how to work together, how not to compete, but how to be able to help each other in the classroom and outside. In 2 weeks, these kids the teacher that came in, it was her first day. I worked with her for 2 weeks. I stayed there to the end of the semester. So, it's kids just trying to understand where they are. And that's kind of what I do with the adults. So let me get into the first model that I want to talk about, which is the one that we started in Texas back in the late 90s or mid 90s. And it was the victim offender mediation dialogue. On the victim mediation dialogue, which is the one that Victoria was talking about, that I presented, was one that, and I was in charge of that program. And so we would prepare the victims of violent crimes to meet with the offender that committed the crime against them. So if you can imagine, a very violent crime where somebody died in this crime, and to be able to come together and talk to each other about what happened. And at first, when all this was, when they invited me to do this work back in, like I said, it was a thing in 97, I couldn't believe that, because I had been working with offenders since 1980. So I was like, that's crazy. What do you mean? You prepare a victim, you prepare an offender, and they come together, and this is a crime where they murdered, their loved one. And it's just not possible. They said, well, that's why we want you to come and work with them and see what we can create, because it is possible. Okay, well, let's do it. And so we began to create a model for to work with the preparing the victims and offenders. One of the reasons because it was the law. You know, the Texas law says that the victims have the right to request a meeting with the offender that committed the crime against them. And so we had to fulfill that law upon their request. Now, the law does say also that it has to be prepared. And so in the prepared is where we decide if that's possible or not. What makes it possible for it to become a meeting for the both of them? Well, what makes it possible is this here. We approach where the victim will first initiate the process. Says, I want to meet with the offender that committed a crime against me. They murdered my husband, daughter, brother, sister, son, whatever, family member. And so we would like to see if we can meet with him. And so with that initiation, then we began a process to see if that's going to be possible or not. And so we would go to the offender and ask the offender, okay, the victim had requested a meeting with you. Well, you can imagine what the offender would say. First initial words that would come out of the mouth would be like, why? No, I can't do that. I cannot do that. Well, let me explain to you what this is about. And so we would explain the program. And after explaining and telling them that what all that I would require them, at least initially, was to say that, you know, they are responsible for the crime they committed. They are the ones who committed the crime. And that they're willing to meet with the victim. Well, after we explained that, and sometimes I would give them time to think about this, they would come back and say, yes, I want to meet with a family member or family members. And so we would do that. Well, you can imagine, you know, those emotions of both the victim and the offender as you're preparing them. And they would always ask me as we were building or creating this model, because we had nothing. So we were creating it as we were going along. It's not like, oh, here's a model, so go ahead and do that. No, we were creating it. And so they would ask me, Mr. Mendoza, why is it that the victim wants to meet with the offender? And why is it that the offender wants to meet with the victim? And those were very good questions. It was a good question because, you know, this is, the money that was being funded through the state to be able to do that. And so, you know, tell us what is this about? What happens? And so, you know, I could never answer the question. I could only answer by saying it's an amazing program. It's a program that you would not believe that when the victim and the offender come in, there's some amazing healing that occurs when this happens. Well, all that sounds good. But, you know, if you're talking about money and if you're talking about, they want to know, give me some kind of more scientific or more as to what goes on with it. And so I began to look at the cases that we had done and began to talk to the victims and the offenders. And then I began to understand if they wanted a more scientific answer was what we call 3 stories the public story, the private story, and the restorative justice story. Now, this was from a lecture I went at UT from a Dr. Rainison in the state of Washington. He did his research on death, violent death. And he talked about the public story, private story, restorative justice story. Now, in his research, had nothing to do with work that he did with victim offender mediations or victim offenders for that matter. His research was just based on violent death. Not necessarily crimes, could be other kinds of suicide or drowning or just house burning. So those violent deaths. But when I saw his model, I began to interpret that with the victim offender mediation, and it fit well. Because in the public story, that's when the crime happens, and all the evidence are investigated and evidence are taken, and so then enough to go ahead and set a trial, and then submit the evidence. Well, our judicial system is mostly plea bargains. And so through the plea bargain, you have the prosecutor, the defendant saying, my defendant has decided to plead guilty. And so, they sentence the offender for so many years. So there's not even a trial most of the time. So that leaves the victim with unanswered questions. All they know is that the evidence that was presented, but that's it. And that this offender pled guilty to this crime, but that's it. So then they go into what is called the private story. And the private story is when the victim stays with an unanswered questions. They don't know the rest of the story. They only know part of the story. And when they are in that stage, it's like living in hell. Because they have to create a scenario that can make sense to them how this death came about. And so they create scenarios. Oh, in the crime, this is how they died, which is not true because they created a scenario that is not, it's a false scenario. But it's important for them to complete it so that they can go through this grief process, separate from the trauma. The more scenarios they create, it's like I said, it's living in hell. That's what they tell me. It's like living in hell because it just keeps coming into their minds. And the offender has the other part of the story. Well, the average separation of the trauma is when they begin to move into the restorative justice story. In the restorative justice story is when they start connecting with their loved ones through those memories prior to the offense. And the more they connect with those memories, the separation from the trauma and the healing process begins. And it's to the point that finally they don't connect no more with those scenarios that they created. And they're able to move with their lives in a way that is not connected to the crime. So then the question that was asked to me was, then why would they want to mediate them? Why would they want a meeting with this offender if they already in a healing process? And what I discovered that was so amazing was that the rest of the story, which is the offender has it, is very important that it be completed with its victim. And so in preparing them with those victim and the offender is to prepare them with their story and to be able to tell their story. And when they come together, this is where to me is you can't help but to believe the power of God. I mean, because when Christ was on the cross, he said, "Forgive them, for they not know what they do." And you had an offender at one side saying, get us out of here. You have the power, just take us down and let us not die here on the cross. And the other one saying, have you no fear? We deserve what we did, but he didn't. And so he says, God, remember me. Christ, remember me when you're in heaven. And so this is what happens here, is that when the offender begins to tell their story and the victim begins to tell their story, those stories connect in a way that is amazing, in that I'm gonna put it this way, because I saw it so many times. And my last case I worked was last November, because I still do volunteer work. Even though I'm working, I still do volunteer work in this. And so my last case was last November. But imagine here you have the victim and the offender. And I believe, because I saw it so many times, is that the victim or the family member, when they're talking to the offender, it's like they're talking to the victim, their loved one. Because they're able to ask questions. And when they're asking questions, they're like asking questions to their loved ones. What happened? Tell me, share it with me. Were you afraid? Did you suffer? What was going on through you? See, those questions, it's like they're talking to their loved one. The offender is like talking to the one that they murdered through this family, because this family is able to tell them, let me tell you who you took away from me. And they tell the story of their loved one. And the offender is hearing for the first time that this wasn't just a person or this wasn't just a number, that they killed, that they just took a life away, like you take an animal's life, No. For the first time, they began to hear who this person truly was. And as they do that, both victim and offender at the end say, it's like I felt this weight on top of me just lifted. Just lifted. We never say to the victim, never do we say, as we're preparing them, you're going to go in there and forgive this offender. We never say to the offender, don't expect the victim to forgive you. But through this process, it's a forgiving process. That when they come together and they end each other's story, they're able to embrace or shake their hands. They take each other's hand. And as he'll say, forgive me for what I did. And the victim will say, I forgive you. I had a man whose mother was brutally murdered. She was in her 60s and was brutally murdered by a young man. And so for 40 years, he held on to the crime scene pictures because he says, I want the parole to see what he did, this animal, what he did to my mother. And as he would talk about that hate was there. When we prepare him and he went and met with that offender, and the offender showed how sorry he was and how he took away the most precious life in his life. At that time, this man was in his, like 19 or 18 years old. And so here, the men saw that this offender was truly telling him the truth of what happened and how he felt. That he said, these pictures, I have held them for 40-some years. Right now. And he began to tear the pictures. He tore the pictures. I don't need these pictures no more. As he said, it's like, I feel this, it's like this Holy Spirit in me. He says, I feel so light. I feel so relieved, like I can breathe. And, they never expected each other to say that. This is something that we see in all the cases we work on. And what's important is how they tell this story. The story of, let me tell you who you took away from me. And I want to know what happened. And so when that happens, those scenarios that they created in their minds, it never went away. They still got them. But when they meet, they disappear. So they say, they're not there no more. Because they now know that story.
Yeah.
So it's how it's the healing comes from that. How we tell this story of what happened. The victim offender, the British to life, that was done because of a crime that was committed also. John Sage was the founder. Amazing, amazing man. Big heart. When they murdered his sister, he went through all those things that I talked about. But finally realized I can't do this no more. I have to find meaning in my life again. But I also want to go inside the prison and I want to talk to those inmates and talk to them about my sister, who she was. If they want to listen, that's fine. But that's what I want to do. And so he asked for us to help him, and we did. And he started going inside the prisons and tell his story. Inmates that were there began to listen to his story, and they would approach him and say, John, I didn't commit a crime against you, but I committed a crime similar to yours. and I also murdered somebody. And I didn't know the impact it would have on those families or my family. And so, John began to listen to that. And so through that, we created a book and a workbook. And the book has the stories of those victims and how they were impacted in their lives because of the crime. And then the workbook has the questions. So each chapter is a week, it's a meeting. And so in that meeting, we come and they get together and they discuss the chapter. And we look at topics like, crime and conflict, the family, faith. We talk about faith. And we talk about responsibility, accountability. We talk about confession and forgiveness, reconciliation. That by the end of that 14 week, they were, as they say, I don't have an excuse now. I know who I am now. If I continue to do this, it's on me. But I can't see myself hurting somebody else again. Bridge to Life, what's so amazing is that, about 30% to 36% nationwide offenders, inmates return back to prison. The recidivism is about 36%. With Bridge to Life, it's 14%. And out of that 14%, only 1.5% are violent crimes. We can't change everybody, but we are changing a lot. From its beginning in 1999 to the present, we have graduated 71,000 inmates through Bridge to Life. 7 years ago, I took it to Mexico. I said, I'm going to take it to Mexico, see if it has the same kind of impact. When I started going into the prisons in Mexico, in Monterrey, which is Nuevo León, in 3 of the most violent prisons in the state. One of them has been closed because there were so many killings and it was old and anyway, they closed it and they're foreigning them out to other prisons. The other 2 are still in operation and we're still doing Bridge to Life. In 2010, I took it to Monterrey, and we did it in those 3 prisons. And it had the same kind of effect that we had here. I remember a story of an inmate that if you saw him, and I don't know if you've been to prisons here in the US, but if you have, let me just say that the prisons here would be like a Holiday Inn or a Hilton Inn compared to Mexican prisons. They are not a place that you want to be. And so this inmate that went through Bridge to Life in Mexico, Caereta, the prison, they were like, and he was a tough looking, all tattoos. He said, he had murdered so many people. He said, I got 3 life sentences. I'm not going nowhere. I'm going to die here. And so he was violent inside the prison. He knew he was never going to get out. So he was violent in prison. And so when he finished Bridge to Life, he said, I cannot hurt anybody else now. I can't. He said, I have to see this prison as a city, as a community. And I have to change, and I have to do good to others so that they won't do those things I used to do, and protect them here inside the prison. I mean, again, if you see those prisons there, where you go into a cell, prison cell in Mexico, and you have, the cell is like what you would see here, for example, may have 2 bunk beds or 3 bunk beds. Well, in Mexico, they have 3 bunk beds, but there's not 6 people in that cell. There's 30, 40, 50 in that cell, sleeping on the floor or sleeping, they tie themselves up and they sleep standing up. So they're very violent because of the conditions. Well, Bridges to Life has made a lot of changes on them that to this day, since 2010, we're still doing Bridges to Life in Monterrey. I took it to other states in Mexico, Toluca, the state of Mexico, which is Toluca, and other prisons. They got like 42 prisons. And the warden says, whatever you've done with this, folks, I appreciate them, because they're not, the prison it's not as violent as it was before. There's still violence, but not what it was. Going into Oaxaca prison, those were the conditions you cannot imagine. No lights in the dining room, no chairs, no tables. You eat on the floor or you eat outside. So most of them would just go get their food and go outside and eat. It was too dark. Michoacan, working with the women, working with the men, Bridge to Life. One kid was like so mad being in the classroom because he had been forced into the classroom, Bridge to Life, that he says, I'll tell it here, everybody, I can't wait to get out and go kill those responsible for me being here. Can't wait to go and hurt them just like they hurt me being here in prison. By the end of the program, he was crying and he apologized. He says, you have taught me that the only one responsible here is me being here. And I want to be able to thank them for letting me be here in prison, because if I had not learned what I've learned this week, I would either be dead here or outside. So it's amazing. And, when they tell me, Eddie, how can you go into those prisons in Mexico? Do you not fear? Do you not think that, what can happen to you? And I said, yeah, of course I fear. I've been in so many prisons now in Mexico that the fear is not, I know God is with me. And I know that what I share, he'll protect me. And if that day comes when, something happens, God forbids, I know that I've done something well, something good. But I know it's hard to believe this, what I'm going to say, but I feel more safe inside the prison than outside. Because on the outside, I don't even know who they may be. If you think of the you know, you hear in the news how violent Mexico is. Yeah, there's violence. There's violence here in the U.S., you know. And so restorative justice is about how you respect the human being and how you treat them and how you teach them to, again, understand why they're here. You know, I always give this, I tell them, I want you to imagine, you know, when I'm inside the prison, I want you to imagine your mother holding you and your mother saying, oh, what a beautiful baby. Look at that eyes. Look at those cheeks. Oh, cachetoncito. Unos ojitos tan hermosos. Ay, mira qué lindo. Beautiful child. One day you're going to be selling drugs. You're going to be hurting people. Someday you may even kill somebody. Yes. And I tell them in Mexico, and I tell them here in the prisons also, to imagine that. And I say, did your mother say that? Oh, no. I said, of course not. Your mother did not say that. And the reason they did not say that, because they created you. You were inside of them. And you were born. And so what happened? That's what we need to understand, what happened. Because you are a child of God. You are still part of this race. And so let's try to understand what happened. And once they began to understand, then they began to repent, forgive, and reconcile. And when they do that, it's like they say, you know, I cannot go hurt somebody else again. And again, we're talking about the violent prisons in Mexico. In the state of Mexico, I went to the prison where El Chopo was confined there. And very violent. When I did Bridge to Life, and then I came back a year later, as a follow-up, they were just embracing me, telling me how they have changed their lives a year later, still changing. And they always say, I remember your words, Eddie. On the 14th session, you said, this is not the end of Bridge to Life, because that's when you complete that, you graduate on the 14th week. You said to us, that's day one, kind of like Crucio, the fourth day. And so here is their 15th day. I said, this is where you start. This is where you start practicing, applying what you learn. And you apply that to the day you die. They asked me, how do you get all this energy? I said, how can you not? You know, when you have the Holy Spirit in you, you know, I'll be 69 years old. And when I go to the doctor, he says, I don't know what you do to yourself, but you got the heart of a 20-year-old. You cholesterol is unbelievable, you know. Do you take medication for that? I said, you know, I don't. I don't take medications. You know, I don't even take vitamins. I should, but I don't. And I feel strong. And as long as God gives me that strength and that power to be able to do that, I will do it. You know, I just came from Mexico 2 weeks ago. I worked with a school, high school kids. They asked me because the same issues you find here: violence, sex, drugs, disrespect. And so they asked me if I would come and work with the kids and work with the teachers, and I did. Days before I got there, a teacher had received a note, an envelope. You know, he thought it was a gift, you know, because right now school was ending. So teachers were receiving gifts. So he opened that envelope, and inside the envelope was a bullet. And the bullet was inscribed, "Your day is near." Now, does a teacher have to put up with it? Your day is near. And this was I met a teacher, amazing heart. We're talking about restorative justice. He says, I didn't know, I couldn't put a name to what I was doing, but he's been doing restorative justice practice for over 10 years, not knowing he was doing restorative justice practice. You know, in his classroom, he does the circle to teach them. He wants them to look at each other. They wants them to talk to each other, to understand each other. And he receives this kind of note. Was he stressed out? Yes, he was. Has he given up? No. So I work with those kids, and I work with the school, and I'll be keeping up with them. It's, I don't know, it's a lot of good things that I believe restorative justice has for us, and to understand. I started with my name. At one time, when I was a teenager, I was very involved with the Chicano movement. And my hate for the white people were unbelievable. It was like I didn't care for them for what they done. I was punished in school every day for speaking Spanish. When I was in high school, the counselor said, here's a program I want you to do after you finish high school. And it was a trade school. And I said, I don't want a trade school. He said, well, that's about all you can do. And so, and she showed me the records. He says, here, all these classes you took, they won't put you in college. I said, well, okay. So I didn't go to college for a year until a teacher saw me on the streets and said, what are you doing? I said, I'm just hanging around here. No, what are you doing with your life? I said, there's not much I can do. He says, there's plenty to do. And he took me in, and he prepared me all the paperwork to enter college. And I did. And I got my degree in social work. And then I started my career, right after that. Why? Because somebody believed. And so what happens is that sometimes some of these kids are not, given that chance. And so we talk about the crimes that they commit and how all that, and I was able to forgive for what I was as a teenager. My hate And why? Because Mr. Ramon, who was a teacher that took me in, and said, no, you can do something. Taught me to forgive. Taught me that the hate won't take you nowhere. And so here I am, 40-some years later. Well, I don't know how much more I have. I as my wife says, you like to talk so much, Eddie, that, if they don't put a stop to you, you'll talk all night.
So Eddie,
yes.
First, I just want to say I am so overwhelmed, and delighted is not the right word, but because I'm so moved by all that you've shared. And I'm going, oh my gosh, you've given us 3 different forms, or a continuum actually, of restorative justice. And starting with children in elementary school, I never connected it that way. So I want to we have about 10 minutes and give people a chance to make a comment or to ask you a question. I see Sandra, and please, if you want to talk, please use the raise your hand. And for those of you who are more technically challenged, just hold your hand up and we'll do the best we can. Sandra, you have a question.
Just something you said. You talked about bringing the victim in to see and speak with the offender. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
You guys can hear me, right?
Yes, so, we hear you.
Yes.
When you talked about that, I imagined it's the victim, the one that has suffered the murder, the one who has been murdered, is actually the healer. Because they're concentrating on, the victim is saying, this is what you did, this is what you took from us. And the offender is telling them what their last words were, how they died. It's like spiritually, the victim is bringing these two together to reconcile. It's amazing.
It is amazing. And it's a healing for both of them, because like I said, the most important in any death, violent or natural death, the story has to be completed as to what happened with the passing away of this person. But it has to be completed in a way that we can understand what happened. And so in murder cases, we don't, because they were not supposed to die that way. So we need a complete story. And the victim's family, it's true that they are the healers in the sense that they're coming in and saying to them, let me tell you who you took away from me. And they're not coming in with vengeance, because they asked me. Now I was able to answer when they would say, how do you know when they're ready? Well, if they're in the private story, we know they're not ready. Because in the private stories, when they're going through all that trauma and scenarios they created, as one father said to me one time, his daughter had been murdered by his son-in-law. It was a family violence, shot her. And he says, I want to go into the prison to meet with the man that killed my daughter, his son-in-law. And but I don't want you to search me, because I'm going to take my gun and I'm going to kill him just the way he killed my daughter. Well, he was in the private story. He was not in the Restorative Justice story. So I know he wasn't ready for that. That's not what this is about.
Let's move on to to what Mike has to ask.
Oh, Mike. Yes, Mike.
Okay. I actually worked in the prison system for about 5 years. However, I was not a correctional officer. I was an assistant general counsel for the agency. But here's my question. A friend of mine spent some serious time at the PAC unit, which is one of 2 prisons on the Brazos River.
Yeah, I know. I've been there.
And he profited from a program called, it goes by some initials. Just a second. I had it a second ago. It was a counseling program for people recently either paroled, I think he paroled out, paroled or otherwise released, that encouraged you, Project Rio, reintegration of offenders.
Yes. Were
you at all aware of that program, and how does it connect up with what you were doing?
Yes. Yeah. The prison system, the Texas prison system has a lot of programs. One of them is that one there. And it's, it's all about holding them accountable and also being able to guide them through those issues that they've been having or they had, and how to deal with them in the outside world. And so like Project Rio, kind of like a Bridge to Life, in our times at the PEG unit, we have Bridge to Life. So not only do they go through Project Rio, they go Bridge to Life, they go through, what's that? It's like Crucio. What are they called? Cairo. So Cairo. And now they do the other one, which is the Catholic part, which is the same thing. It's like Cairo, except that Catholics go and do that. And so it's a combination, Mike, of all of that that helps them look at themselves. One of the things that I tell them, I give them a formula, and I got this formula from a good friend of mine whose mother was cousin to Albert Einstein. So Albert Einstein, and so he talks about my cousin's formula, or I got this from my cousin's formula. It's C equals A plus A plus A to the second power. And so C stands for change. And so for change to occur, the first A equals awareness. You gotta have some awareness. So Project Rio, Bridge to Life, Cairo, so on and so on, they all bring some kind of awareness. But change is not gonna occur if the next A plus A, which is you have to change that attitude. Once they change that attitude, then change starts coming, but you still won't have change if plus A, which is acceptance. You have to now accept who you are. See, a lot of them can't accept who they are until they go through those steps of confession and being able to repent, to forgive, and to reconcile. Then they're able to accept who they are now. But even then, it's not going to happen, change, until to the second power, which is action. You got to put it into action. And so once you put it into action, then you begin to make that change. And so I tell them, and I write their formula, this is what you got to do.
Eddie, could you repeat how the formula is written?
It's C equals A plus A plus a second power to the second power.
So like parentheses, A plus B, the whole aggregate to the second power.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So really there's 4 A's, which is awareness, attitude, acceptance, and action.
Yeah. So that's really cool. Well, it is now 8:30 and it's time for us to end. And all I can just say is thank you so much, Eddie.
Yes.
You have just opened our eyes.
Yes.
And you have put it so beautifully, giving us a theological context for restorative justice as well. And that's just...
Gracias por compartir.
Sí.
Oh, sí, gracias a usted.
Y I apologize. Lo siento mucho que no podía decir a Eddie que necesita hablar bilingüe.
No, era importante que ustedes disfrutaran la conferencia. Yo logré entender, pero si ustedes se ponen a traducirme, ustedes no van a disfrutar. Y esta vez era importante que ustedes disfrutaran la conferencia.
Muchas gracias. So what Patricia is saying, as I was saying, I'm sorry we weren't able to do some bilingual translation or conversation with her. And she said, no, don't worry about it. You needed to be able to focus and enjoy and appreciate what Eddie was saying. And she was able to keep up well enough.
Can I ask Patricia a question?
Yes.
Patricia, ¿de dónde vienes?
Yo vengo de San Luis Potosí, en el centro de México.
Sí, no, claro, le estaba yo platicando que mis abuelos, en el lado de parte de mi papá, vienen del estado de San Luis.
Oh, qué hermoso estado.
Sí, muy hermoso. Y ha hecho bastante trabajo en México. So I've done a lot of work. I was telling her I've done a lot of work in Mexico.
I'm
let me just finish.
Yeah, go ahead and finish.
Let me finish with one last thing.
Yes.
That I'm real happy and proud of, and that is that I just completed completed a book that I wrote with my co-author, Maria Guadalupe Saucedo Boteo from the state of Michoacan. We did a book called Reflections, en español, reflexiones, un espacio para el alma, prácticas restaurativas, which is reflections as a space for your soul, applying restorative justice practices. And that came about because we're doing a lot of restorative justice circles, which I didn't talk about that, but restorative justice circles in the rural communities in Mexico, and talk about violence and what goes on. We're working with the kids, we're working with the women, we're working with men, and how to start looking at that chain that they can't seem to break and continues, with that violence in Mexico. And one day I can show you pictures. I got pictures of the faces, how they are, changing their lives with it. Anyway. All right. Well,
I'm sure that a lot of people would agree. We would love to have you come back. So don't be surprised if we invite you back for another fun time.
Oh, I'm very welcome to, I would be very pleased to come back and be a part. Thank you for that invitation. And it's always good to talk about this here. I love what I do.
That's very obvious. I'm going to stop the recording now. And so thank you.